Manitoba's Premier Wab Kinew just delivered one of the most savage political takedowns we've seen this year, and it involves Republicans complaining about wildfire smoke. While Canada battles devastating wildfires that have killed people and displaced thousands, a group of Republican lawmakers decided to file official complaints about the smoke drifting into their states. Kinew's response? He accused them of throwing a timber tantrum and called them attention seekers who can't solve real problems. This isn't just a war of words, it's a perfect example of how some politicians exploit natural disasters for political gain, while real people are suffering. Let's break down exactly what happened and why Kinew's response has everyone talking. The story begins with Canada facing another devastating wildfire season. Manitoba alone has declared a state of emergency twice this year, with fires burning across the province. We're talking about real human tragedy here. A husband and wife were killed by a fast-moving wildfire northeast of Winnipeg in May, and thousands of people have been forced to evacuate their homes. These aren't just statistics on a page. These are families losing everything they've worked for, communities being torn apart, and firefighters risking their lives every day. But instead of offering support or genuine solutions, a group of Republican lawmakers from Wisconsin, Iowa, Minnesota, and North Dakota decided to make this about politics. Wisconsin State Representative Calvin Callahan led the charge, joining other Republican state lawmakers in filing a formal complaint against Canada to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and the International Joint Commission. Their complaint, CANA, Diane wildfire smoke is making it hard for Americans to enjoy their summer. Let me read you exactly what they wrote. We write to you today on behalf of our constituents who have had to deal with suffocating Canadian wildfire smoke filling the air to begin the summer. In our neck of the woods, summer months are the best time of the year to spend time outdoors recreating, enjoying time with family, and creating new memories. But this wildfire smoke makes it difficult to do all those things. They're literally complaining that smoke from fires that have killed people is ruining their outdoor recreation time. The Republican lawmakers called for an investigation of Canada's wildfire management practices and demanded real consequences if Canada can't get the fires under control. Representative Callahan said if Canada can't get these wildfires under control, they need to face real consequences. We won't sit back while our air becomes a health hazard. The audacity is breathtaking. They're demanding consequences for a country dealing with natural disasters that are largely driven by climate change. This wasn't an isolated incident either. Michigan Representative Jack Bergman sent a letter to Canadian Senator Michael McDonald, calling for stronger forest management policies and more accountability from Canadian officials. Michigan Representative John James sent a letter to Prime Minister Mark Carney saying his constituents are choking on toxic wildfire smoke. It's like they think Canada is deliberately setting fires just to annoy Americans. That's when Premier Kinew stepped in with his epic response. He didn't hold back, calling these Republicans attention seekers and accusing them of political grandstanding. These are attention seekers who can't come up with a good idea on healthcare or on making life more affordable, Kinew told the Canadian press. So they're playing games with something that's very serious. He nailed it perfectly. These politicians are using a genuine tragedy to score cheap political points. But Kinew went further, coining the phrase that's now making headlines everywhere: timber tantrum. He accused the group of Republicans of throwing a timber tantrum and playing political games after they called out Canada over wildfires. It's the perfect phrase because it captures exactly what this is: grown politicians having a tantrum about something they don't understand and can't control. What makes Kinew's response even more powerful is that he didn't generalize about all Americans. He was very careful to distinguish between these particular attention-seeking politicians and the American people as a whole. I don't generalize these attention seekers' misguided words to all Americans, Kinew said. He pointed out that American firefighters have been helping to fight Canada's wildfires, and Canadian firefighters were on the ground and in the air during California's devastating wildfire season. This is crucial context that these Republican lawmakers conveniently ignore. There's a long history of cooperation between Canadian and American firefighting efforts. When California was burning, Canadian firefighters didn't hesitate to help. When Canada needs assistance, American firefighters cross the border to lend a hand. Kinew even thanked the Trump administration for sending federal firefighting resources to Canada and Manitoba. This is how neighbors should behave, by helping each other, not by filing complaints about smoke. The timing of these Republican complaints is particularly tone-deaf given the broader context of U.S.-Canada relations. This is happening while the bilateral relationship between the two countries remains tense due to Trump's trade policies. On August 1st, President Trump boosted tariffs on Canadian goods to 35% after a new security and economic agreement failed to materialize. Canada is also being hit with Trump's steel, aluminum, copper, and automobile tariffs. So while the economic relationship is already strained, these Republicans decided to pile on with complaints about wildfire smoke. Let's talk about the science behind what's actually happening here. Natural resources. Canada has attributed the surge in wildfires to climate change, citing prolonged drought and rising global temperatures. This isn't some new phenomenon that Canada suddenly started experiencing because they're bad at forest management. Climate change is making wildfires more frequent, more intense, and harder to control across North America. The 2023 wildfire season was the worst on record for Canada, with smoke reaching not just the United States, but even Northern Europe. The Republican lawmakers point to that 2023 season as evidence of Canadian mismanagement. But that's like blaming Florida for hurricanes or California for earthquakes. These are natural disasters exacerbated by climate change, the same climate change that many of these same Republicans refuse to acknowledge or address. Trump has repeatedly dismissed climate change as a hoax and disbanded scientific teams working on climate reports. So they're complaining about the effects of a problem they won't even admit exists. Currently, according to Natural Resources Canada, there have been 2,672 fires documented in 2025, with 354 still active and 105 designated as uncontrolled. Some of these fires have been burning since 2023. This is the scale of the challenge Canada is facing, and it's not something that can be solved by filing complaints or demanding consequences. The health impacts are real, and nobody is denying that. Wildfire smoke does create air quality issues that affect people with respiratory conditions. In 2023, 100 million Americans were affected in some way by wildfire smoke, with states coast to coast ordering people to stay indoors and wear protective respiratory gear. But the solution isn't to blame Canada or file formal complaints. It's to work together on addressing the root causes and supporting each other during these disasters. Representative John James escalated the rhetoric even further, saying that Kinew's declaration of a second state of emergency in Manitoba confirmed what many Americans have feared, that Canada is not doing nearly enough to stop these fires before they start. This shows a fundamental misunderstanding of how wildfires work. You can't just stop lightning-caused fires in remote wilderness areas before they start. About half of Canada's wildfires are caused by lightning and burn the most area according to the Canadian National Fire Database. James also criticized Kinew's earlier comments where the Premier said it turns people off politics when you have got a group of congresspeople trying to trivialize and make hay out of a wildfire season where we've lost lives in our province. James claimed that Kinew's comments dismissed the health impacts on neighboring states and that the smoke amounts to a public health emergency that is actively damaging the U.S.-Canada relationship. But here's the thing, Kinew isn't dismissing health concerns. He's calling out the political opportunism. There's a huge difference between genuine concern for public health and filing formal complaints, demanding consequences from a country dealing with natural disasters. If these Republicans were truly concerned about public health, they'd be supporting climate action and international cooperation on wildfire management. The irony is thick here. These same Republicans who complain about government overreach and federal interference are demanding that the federal government file complaints against a foreign country over weather patterns.
Probably the most disliked politician in the world in Canada because he's attacked his closest family member, and that's the way we look upon it. And when I talk to the governors and senators and Congress people, even Republicans totally disagree, but they're too scared to come out and say anything because the president will go after them. Outside of a few senators, and I want to thank them for coming out and standing with not just American people, but their closest friends and allies, which is Canada. And again, we love the Americans. It's unfortunate President Trump decided to go down this road.
And here's what makes this even more absurd. When you look at how unpopular these kinds of attacks on Canada are, even among Republicans themselves. Behind closed doors, many Republican governors, senators, and Congress members actually disagree with this confrontational approach toward Canada. They understand that Canada is America's closest ally, but they're afraid to speak out publicly because they fear political retaliation. It's a perfect example of how toxic politics has become when elected officials are too scared to defend our closest neighbor and trading partner. They're the same politicians who often oppose environmental regulations and climate action, but now they want to hold Canada accountable for the effects of climate change. Premier Kinew's timber tantrum comment perfectly captures the childish nature of this political theater. While real people are losing their homes and lives, these politicians are having a tantrum about smoke affecting their constituents' summer recreation plans. It's the political equivalent of complaining to the manager about rain ruining your picnic. What's particularly galling is that some of these fires have been burning since 2023, meaning this isn't some sudden failure of Canadian forest management. These are persistent fires in remote wilderness areas that are incredibly difficult to access and control. Canadian firefighters, first responders, and volunteers continue to work tirelessly to protect lives and property, often with assistance from American firefighting teams. The response from U.S. Ambassador to Canada Pete Hoekstra shows what real leadership looks like. He acknowledged the gravity of the situation and called it a reminder of the shared environmental challenges facing both nations. Canadians stood with us during the tragic California wildfires earlier this year, and we are committed to standing with Canada now, Hoekstra said. This is the kind of mature, cooperative response that builds relationships and actually helps solve problems. Meanwhile, these Republican lawmakers are more interested in scoring political points than finding solutions. Representative Callahan even had the audacity to respond to Kinew's ambulance chaser comment by saying, "Premier Kinew may call me an ambulance chaser, but I'm working to make sure my constituents with respiratory concerns don't end up in one because of his wildfire smoke." The self-righteousness is astounding, as if filing complaints is somehow protecting people from smoke. The broader pattern here is deeply troubling. We're seeing politicians exploit natural disasters and international crises for domestic political gain. Instead of working on real solutions like climate action, international cooperation, and supporting affected communities, they're playing blame games and filing complaints. It's exactly the kind of politics that turns people off and makes real progress impossible. Premier Kinew's response shows how to handle this kind of political opportunism. Call it out directly, don't let it slide, but also maintain the important relationships and cooperation that actually matter. He thanked American firefighters who are helping in Manitoba while simultaneously calling out the politicians who are exploiting the situation. That's the kind of leadership we need more of. The timber tantrum phrase is already becoming a perfect shorthand for this kind of political theater. It captures the childish, attention-seeking nature of politicians who would rather complain and blame than actually work on solutions. And it's particularly fitting given that these are the same politicians who often complain about political correctness and demand that people toughen up, but apparently can't handle some smoke without filing formal complaints. This story matters because it shows us two very different approaches to crisis management and international relations. On one side, you have cooperation, mutual aid, and recognition of shared challenges. On the other side, you have blame, complaints, and political opportunism. The contrast couldn't be clearer, and Premier Kinew's response shows which approach actually serves people better. The timing is particularly important given the broader tensions in U.S.-Canada relations under the Trump administration.
He's probably the most disliked politician in the world in Canada because he's attacked his closest family member, and that's the way we look upon it. And when I talk to the governors and senators and Congress people, even Republicans totally disagree, but they're too scared to come out and say anything because the president will go after them. Outside of a few senators, and I want to thank them for coming out and standing with not just American people, but their closest friends and allies, which is Canada. And again, we love the Americans. It's unfortunate President Trump decided to go down this road.
The reality is that this kind of attack on Canada, America's closest ally and neighbor, has made these politicians deeply unpopular even within their own party. Many Canadians view these attacks as coming from someone who doesn't understand the importance of the bilateral relationship. Despite the political tensions, the Canadian people still maintain their affection for Americans and understand that these political games don't represent the true feelings of most Americans toward their northern neighbors. It's unfortunate that some politicians have chosen confrontation over cooperation, especially when dealing with natural disasters that affect both countries. At a time when the two countries should be working together on shared challenges like climate change and natural disasters, we're seeing some politicians choose division and blame instead. It's exactly the wrong approach at exactly the wrong time. What Premier Kinew has done is refuse to let this political theater go unchallenged while maintaining the important relationships that actually matter. His timber tantrum comment will be remembered long after these Republican complaints are forgotten because it perfectly captured the absurdity of the situation. Sometimes the best response to political opportunism is to call it exactly what it is, a tantrum.